Hello and welcome to Draft Day, the podcast where we draft things. Hi, my name is John. I'm one of the hosts of Draft Day, joined by the other host of Draft Day, Jason Bradshaw, who is wearing a shirt that's strikingly similar to the shirt that I wore all day. And now I feel like I have to grab the shirt I was wearing and put it back on just so we can match. Jason, how are you doing?
All right, I'm a little plugged up. Wore the flannel today because it's a cold day here in the Midwest.
It
So
is cold. It was pretty solid utility throughout the day. And then I got home and then I just didn't care as much. So oh
yeah,
well.
I mean the office is home for me, so it was a pretty pretty benign, I guess, day. And then I just went to Costco and spent half of my income. So
Nice. You do seem to be drinking a Coke Zero though, which you can get for a good rate at Costco.
but I actually got these and through rebates got them for free. So
S- Solid work. Solid work. So last episode was a little bit of a different approach to our this here podcast. We instead of drafting from a specific draft that happened, we drafted from like the entire history of basketball, and we drafted a de facto top 10 list of the greatest players of all time. And you know what? The thing that's really good about that is we prepared for much more than 10, so we can just run it back.
yes, yes, we can. It
Yes,
was it was very nice to be like, hey, you just want to do this? Okay,
yeah,
cool.
it's
Keep going.
it's pretty solid. So yeah, we have a top 10, and now let's build it up to a top. I don't know what we're gonna build it up to, but until we feel like we've gone long enough, maybe we'll not have as much expository dialogue as we did last episode.
Given that it's us, I don't know that I would count on that, but
I wouldn't count on it. I'm just saying it's possible. Like in theory, I don't think we're any more long-winded than we were a couple weeks ago whenever we recorded the first episode.
and I think given that I sound like I'm you know, I don't know, eating gravel while I talk or something, it could go shorter, and I'll try not to be
Doesn't
distracted by the Four Nations face-off game, which is about to
yeah.
kick off here.
Saying that
As
you
we-
sound like gravel is extremely hot. Sorry to all the ladies out there. He is taken, but
I
you
mean,
know
I'm
that
starting to get
doesn't
that.
mean you.
Starting to get the Barry White thing going. It's like, hey,
Yeah, you really do
blah,
have a Betty
blah,
White thing going. Oh, Barry White. Sorry, my bad.
or maybe I thought I was being Mike Gravel, is what I meant.
R.I.P. to Betty White and Mike Gravel and Barry White. They're all dead. Speaking of dead, maybe we'll draft some dead guys in the continuation of our draft. Which how many dead guys did we draft last time? Like 3?
Tell you what,
We
hey
had
guys.
yes, we had Russell, Chamberlain, and Kobe. Was there anyone else? I don't have the list up in front of me.
I don't think so. And Bill Russell, like he's just like a recently deceased, right?
Yeah, I actually was in Springfield about to drive home whenever the news broke. I had left your house already, but I had not left for St. Louis yet. We had just had breakfast at the Throat Roll place that I'm forgetting the name of all of a sudden.
Um, wow,
This is bad. This is not
yeah,
good. Okay, we have to think of the name of this place before we start drafting.
yeah.
With an S? I'm picturing the billboard. I can picture the billboard just without the name. Oh no. There's one in like Sykes in Missouri. There's one in like Alabama too.
Lamberts.
Lamberts. There we go.
They throw the rolls
Lamberts.
at you.
Yes. Pretty good rolls.
They are. They're good rolls, free pass arounds. It's a good time. Is it the best food you'll ever have? Nah, but it's pretty inexpensive, and if you finish your entree, they give you more. So
Nice. I did not finish mine, but had some good rolls. So yeah.
I Yeah, if I remember right, I don't know that much of us were eating a ton because, well, I believe beverages were heavily consumed the night prior. So,
Doesn't sound like a Saturday night that we hang out in Springfield. I don't know what you're talking about.
hey, I can't remember. I'm just kind of guessing. So,
I bet you can't remember. All right, so we did come up with Lamberts though, so we'll get on drafting. And I guess we never formally discussed, but since you got the last pick of, since you picked number 10, do I just pick number 11? Then we just keep going on like that
I
for.
figured we would just stick with that order.
Okay. All right, sounds good. So for my pick, I'm gonna go with a player. So whenever I was coming up with my initial list of like kind of thinking from the beginning of like, who's the greatest of all time, I had like a few criteria that I kind of put out there. And like, so basketball is like the one sport where I think that like whether you've won a title actually does have some material impact on how I view you. Like with other sports, I'm much more open to the idea of you're just kind of, it's to the credit of your teammates for the most part. But I feel like if you're like the greatest player of all time, you probably should have at least a title. It just seems like it would be hard. I think everybody we drafted on our first episode has at least one title.
I don't know. I mean, they all might have multiple, even. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So, but I think one. I'm not even gonna like get
Yeah, yeah.
too deep into it, but like, and then like also I think that to be the greatest, you have to have been the greatest at one point in your career. So I think like a couple MVPs should be like kind of
Yeah.
baseline. And I think just having like consistently be, because you can't just have 2 good years. Like all due respect to like Brandon Roy or whatever, but like you got to have it sustained a little bit. So I think like if you can be like first team All NBA double digit times, that just means that you are considered one of the 5 best players in the NBA for like a decade. That's remarkable.
Yeah.
There are 5 players in the history of the NBA that have made 10 first team All NBA teams, won multiple MVPs, and won a title. 3 of the 5 were the first 3 players we drafted in this draft. It was Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Number 4 was drafted a little bit later in the episode. It was Tim Duncan. And I am going to draft the 5th player that fits all that criteria right now. I am going to pick St. Louis Hawks legend Bob Pettit. It's my number 11 player. And I think he is genuinely maybe the most underrated athlete in like major team sports history. Again, this guy has a comparable resume to, a guy like Tim Duncan. Like again, he is the last guy we're drafting of this group. So I'm not saying he's, the number 1, but this is a guy that averaged 26.4 points per game, 16.2 rebounds per game, just an absolutely like absurdly talented player, by far the greatest player in the history of not only the St. Louis Hawks, but the entire Hawks franchise. And I think that just because he spent his career with a team that doesn't exist and hasn't existed in like the mass media age, I think he just gets kind of shuffled aside. And I will not be contributing to that. This is a guy who, received MVP votes 9 times. He had 2 scoring titles and a rebounding title. He was just kind of covered, and this was in an era, notably that had Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell in it.
Yeah.
He was competing against tough players, and the one NBA Finals that Bill Russell lost as a player was against the St. Louis Hawks, and it was because Bob Pettit went psycho mode. Bob Pettit became the first of currently 2 players in the history of the NBA, and the other one I'm sure will get drafted at some point, who has scored 50 plus points in a series NBA Finals clinching game, and he did it against Bill Russell. So yeah, Bob Pettit, I think he is just amazing. I think the fact that he gets like no attention even in St. Louis, even though he's still alive, is criminal. And I went on record that he is awesome, and I had him at number 10 on my total list, but number 11, I'm perfectly content putting him there too.
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely, for whatever reason, has been lost to history in players of that era. I don't know why. I don't know if it's because maybe the Hawks aren't as storied of a franchise, or he
Yeah.
did it when they were in St. Louis.
I mean, I think even if they had been in Atlanta the whole time, I think the fact that the Hawks have one championship and the Celtics have, what do they have, like 19 at this point? They have a ton of championships at this point. And then, like, Will Chamberlain, played for historic franchises, if not Celtics level historic, but also has like 100 points. Like, there's a very obvious, like, headline to point out.
Well, yeah, the man like single-handedly just out rebounded teams. Like, excuse me, but yeah, I think it's definitely a that's a good pick. I had him on my list, not quite that high, um, but maybe it's my own detriment. I mean, he was top 15 in mine, so
Yeah,
you
I
know,
mean, I
not
think that's reasonable. So this would have been, I don't know, like a month or two ago. I was just kind of cycling through like Facebook with like Facebook Reels or whatever, and like one of those like clickbait kind of videos was discussing the top 10 white players in NBA history, and he was not on the list. I was like, what on earth? How could? And this was like top white American players too. It's like, okay, if you want to put Larry Bird ahead of him, fine. There's some other guys that like I wouldn't, but I can see there's defensible, but like Dolph Shays was on the list. Come on. And Dolph Shays is a good player, but come on. Absolutely not.
Yeah, I remember I was looking at one list and it was a really weird number. It's like the top 78 players of all time or something, and Pettit is not included in their list of that, which is
Yeah.
insane. They also had a
I
bunch
feel
of
like
current players like in like the top 20, 25, where I'm like, there's probably some, but
well what's
oh,
weird is that like if you want to say that Bob Pettit like athletically probably is in the top 78 players of all time, I think there's a case for that, but my guess is that this list probably included Russell and Chamberlain. It might have even included like George Mikan or somebody who's even older than Pettit, and he's just completely wiped out of history.
it's yeah, it I mean, I think Russell and Chamberlain were top 5 maybe in this list. So it's like
Yeah, there's
it's
something wrong with your calculus if you have them that high and then don't have at least like within 10 of that or whatever.
but no, I mean that's a good pick, and I like the Homer shout out. So
Yeah, I mean, I had to kind of calibrate like how much of a homer am I being, and then I look at those numbers. It's like I don't think I'm being a homer at all. I think that
I
like I'm looking at the stats of the guy that I have right below him, and like there's a case for the guy that I have below him ahead of Pettit, but the guy that I have below him doesn't have like single-handedly beat Bill Russell in an NBA Finals, and like that counts for something.
agreed, and yeah, I mean, I think it's I think we even talked about. I think even after like maybe the top 8 or so, this is really going to start to come down to like just preference in what we look at, or you know, personal things. Like this is where, yeah, I think we could probably come close to agreeing on like the top 10 players of all time. If we did, like, we'd probably at least have 8 or 9 of them be the same.
Yeah, well, I think that of our comprehensive top 10 list, each of us had 9 of our 10, and like
So
the other guy was not that far off of our top 10s.
yeah, so
All right, you are up.
I'm up, and it's crazy that like this is a guy that I always knew as a player, knew was good, and partially going to give him maybe an edge up versus some other players, um, due to just being an absolute monster in college as well.
I think
Um,
I know the route you're
and
going,
the
but I'll hear you
irony
out.
here is he's not even the best player in his own draft. Um,
There we go.
I'll take Hakeem Olajuwon with my next
Yep.
pick. One of those where, like, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't like. I always knew who he was. It was never, oh, he's not good. It's like, but how good he was. He's 12-time All Star, 2-time Finals MVP. Um, I think he had one regular season MVP as well. 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. 2-time rebounding champ, 2-time NBA champ, 9-time all defensive team. I mean, the accolades go on and on.
Yeah,
Uh,
arguably the best defensive player of his era, just
yeah,
period. And like, honestly, in the conversation for best defensive players ever, like he's on the short list.
yeah, and a guy who, let's be honest, how good do you really have to be if you're drafted in the same draft as Michael Jordan and you're like, this guy wasn't a bust to be taken ahead of Michael Jordan?
Yeah, I think I made this point on our '84 draft episode,
I
where it's
believe
like,
so.
it's insanely good that you have to be that. Like, no one's like making fun of Houston for taking this guy, even though
I mean,
like
they got
everyone
2
agrees
titles out
Jordan's.
of it.
Yeah,
So
I think one of the great what ifs with Hakeem is, would Hakeem have gotten the titles if Jordan had still played basketball? And like, I think he probably would have gotten at least one of them, because like
I think so.
the Bulls team that had gotten the three-peat, like obviously Jordan was still awesome and Pippen was still awesome, but like a lot of those guys were getting older or they were leaving in free agency and they were going to need to get paid. Like, I think Hakeem's still getting a title, and I think that that becomes like, maybe not quite the Bob Pettit title where it's, being Bill Russell, but it's still viewed as like,
Yeah,
conquering this difficult task.
yeah, and I think it's he obviously they had some good teams there, um, as well. But like, yeah, he's a guy who you know gets in and I believe has an Olympic ring as well because I think he played for the U.S. Right? Was it the Dream Team he was on?
He has a gold medal from '96, I believe. He was not on the
96.
dream team, but
The next one, but
he was
like,
absolutely, I don't think he was an American citizen at that point. He was absolutely like quality of being on the dream team for sure.
oh, absolutely. But yeah, being obviously born or being from Nigeria, I believe, if I'm remembering, is that right? Is it Nigeria he's from? I should probably look that up.
Sounds right. I believe because I used to always get him and Mutombo mixed up in my head, like because they were had like similar styles of play, even though Hakeem was a much better offensive player. Yes, he is Nigerian, and I believe Mutombo is Congolese. Yep. Okay.
Sounds right. So, but yeah, I mean, just a guy who did it all. Like, I mean, an honest question: Michael Jordan doesn't exist. How many championships does he have? How many MVPs does he have? Like, he there was what only a couple of seasons where he got MVP votes that he wasn't like top 5, top 7 in. Like,
Yeah, and
so I
he
mean, there's
was
obviously other guys, but it,
and he was in like a pretty good era for centers. Like, there are some other centers, kind of his contemporaries, that are in this sort of general range for me. Like, maybe either later this episode or maybe early next episode. But his
yeah,
run in the I think his run in the '80s is super underrated, because like people think of the '80s and they think of Lakers and Celtics, and then they think a little bit of Jordan coming in. But like the Rockets were terrible before he got there, but they were like, the biggest threat for the Lakers in the West for the second half of the '80s, and it was almost entirely because of Hakeem. And like the fact that Clyde Drexler joined him halfway through the second title, I think might confuse some more casual fans and thinking, oh, it was him and Drexler, and like really it was kind of a diminished version of Drexler for half a season. It was Hakeem really carrying a team that like had like Kenny
Drexler,
Smith, like it had good players, but
yeah,
clearly number one.
yeah, yeah. This isn't Drexler, playing it in Portland or wherever he was, right
No.
when he came out. Like all I remember is when Drexler was on the Rockets, he looked like he was about 60 already. So
Yeah, like Drexler's an interesting player because I remember when I first like became aware of the Dream Team in like, I don't know, probably like the late '90s or whatever, kind of thinking that like Leitner was always considered to be like the least of the group, like from day one, but like Drexler and Mullen always seemed like kind of a shade down from the other guys, and it really was because like Drexler just kind of like aged quickly and didn't have the high highs. But that's not to diminish Clyde Drexler, who I'm sure is on both of our extended lists.
I mean, he's the guy that I would assume we'll get to at some point. But yeah, obviously too, just like like if you've I don't know if you've ever gone back and like I've found like old highlight videos of his college team, their college team, I guess, if we're talking about both of them.
Yeah.
My goodness, they were fun. Obviously, unfortunately, I think they're most well known for losing to the underdog NC State than anything. But
Oh
like,
yeah, for sure.
but Phi Slamma Jamma, that's a goated nickname for like a college
It
basketball team.
is. And like almost certainly the best college team to never win a title, just in terms of having those two guys in college at the same time and not winning a title is just kind of crazy. And like granted the other guys at Houston were not of that echelon, but they had
Yeah,
like
but we saw what one guy can usually do, like Bill Russell winning San Francisco multiple titles.
it doesn't have to be Bill Russell, it can just be like Kemba Walker. Nice NBA career, but like doesn't necessarily have to even be like a
Right?
demigod.
Yeah,
It just has to be like
or like the way that Jimmer Fredette would carry BYU. I mean,
for sure.
or JJ Redick even. Like,
I'm remembering Shabazz Napier at UConn a few years after Kemba, with LeBron openly lobbying the Heat to draft him, and then they drafted him, and then he signed with the Cavs like a week later.
funny how that works.
I mean, he got his son drafted. I'm not going to feel too bad for him, but
Nah,
all right. So, are you ready for lucky number 13?
let's do it, man.
So the criteria that I issued before with the 10 All NBA first teams, multiple MVPs, and a title, this guy fits the first two of those three criteria, but I didn't feel bad excluding him from the fact because he's like a pretty rotten guy, but I am drafting the first guy so far that has not won a championship. I'm going with Karl Malone. Honestly, he's almost the opposite of Hakeem in the sense of like he doesn't really have a highlight reel. He just has like completely crazy production for his career. The guy played forever. He averaged 25 a game, 10 plus boards per game. An all defensive player, first team 3 times, second team once. 14 total all NBA teams. He received MVP votes in 15 seasons. Like it's one of those things where just like aesthetically he doesn't quite feel like he's of that level, and I think that's why that and the lack of rings is part of why he doesn't get thrown into greatest of all time conversations, but just like pure production, it's kind of hard to get past him. And like in terms of and win shares is definitely a flawed stat, especially when you're comparing guys to like replacement level rather than just accumulation. But he's number one of the guys left in win shares, and it's not honestly that close. And so, yeah, Karl Malone, pretty bad guy, like I said, but we didn't spend Kobe's whole segment talking about his infractions. So,
Yeah, on
trust Karl Malone for what he was, which was a great player who got completely owned in 3 NBA finals, including one of the most hilarious upsets in history when he was with the Lakers for that year.
Forgot about that year.
Yeah, like people think about the Detroit Pistons beating Shaq and Kobe, but the part where they had Karl Malone and Gary Payton, granted both of them were well past their primes at this point, but like they were still on the team and they were still starters, along with like Devin George or whoever was the small forward. But
yeah,
Mailman, as Dennis Rodman would say, or Scottie Pippen would say, doesn't deliver on Sundays, but he delivers every other day of the week. So we'll put him at 13.
I mean, I think he's a guy who, maybe how good he is at times gets a little overshadowed because you almost never mention him in the same breath without Stockton.
Yeah,
a guy who will again come up on this list probably.
Yeah. Also, like, and this is kind of hard to convey. I was thinking about this today about how, especially with the Chiefs lately, there's a lot of Chiefs fans, and you probably know this better than I do, who like haven't been able to accept the idea that they're like the heels of the NFL, and they just want everybody to love them. And sometimes you'll hear people say, "Well, everyone was rooting for Michael Jordan. Like, why don't people embrace this dynasty?" I think an underrated part of it is that Karl Malone and John Stockton, like, even setting aside their off-court stuff, which is myriad, but even setting aside that, they're not very likable players on the court. They were both pretty dirty. They weren't really all that fun to watch. But they were like, you can't deny that they were great.
Yeah, that's and let's be honest too. Like Utah's just not necessarily a locale. I don't think that people are gonna
Yeah.
gravitate towards.
It is kind of this funny thing where they really did get like the two guys, maybe in NBA history, certainly in the last like 40 years of NBA history, who were most equipped to enjoy, like genuinely enjoy playing in Utah. Like you have John Stockton, the white guy with short shorts. You have Karl Malone, who's like maybe the biggest redneck in NBA history. It's like all he wants to do is hunt, and that's the more wholesome of the activities. I'm gonna quit making these jokes. But yeah, two guys that just like really enjoyed it.
Sorry.
Yeah. I will say though, I think that I don't know, I get the impression that most players who play for Utah seem to be okay with it. Like it's certainly not the most exciting NBA city, but it's probably pretty fun to be like a god in a city that I guess they have two professional teams now, but for a long time just had the one.
Yeah, I mean it's they're the guys. I think that I don't know that anybody anytime soon is going to come close to touching them in terms of greatness. I mean, now I guess the state of Utah does have a NHL franchise, but you
We'll
got a
see
lot.
if Clayton Keller and who else is on them? What's that other? There's another center.
Yeah, what? Dylan Gunther's a good young player they got.
But regardless, I think those two guys are going to be competing for a while to catch up with. Because Stockton and Malone, like, it's absurd because they were back-to-back drafts. They were teammates for 18 consecutive seasons, and neither one of them ever had a significant injury. Like John Stockton played 1,504 NBA games. Karl Malone played 1,476 NBA games. The vast majority of them were with each other. They basically both each had one season of overlap where they weren't teammates.
Which is kind of insane.
Yeah. I don't think that part's ever going to happen again.
Yeah. I think in just the modern era, it's just not. We talked about this with some of the guys that we took, a lot of the guys being one franchise guys. I think that time's just, I mean, you don't even get that in college anymore. Like, hardly.
And even if you get guys who are like, thinking of guys who are in the NBA now, like, Giannis or something like that, who's been with his team for a while. He's only been on one team, seems to really enjoy where he's playing. But, like, the guys he won a title with, like, most of them are gone already. And that was 4 years ago. They got rid of Drew Holiday. They got rid of Chris Middleton.
It's, and something tells me, Stockton will get talked about. Not too far down the line.
Yeah, he will come up. Will he come up next? We'll have to see.
Time to see. And before I pick next, 1-0 Finland.
Oh, come on.
On a goal from Henri Jokiharju, who has a whopping 1 goal for Buffalo this season. So
I'll say I've heard that name. I can't say I can picture anything about him.
Yeah, he's he's an NHLer, but
got an assist from Olli Maatta, who apparently is still in the NHL. Is he on Chicago still?
Shoot, I don't know. I feel like the last time I knew Olli Maatta was playing, he was on Pittsburgh, which has probably been like 8 years now. But so the next one, as we were saying, John Stockton's going to come up again, and it won't be now.
I was going to say, I would hope not.
Yeah. This one, a lot of different ways I could go. I'm going to go with a guy who 12-time NBA All-Star, has a ring, 11-time All-NBA, 1960-61 Rookie of the Year, Mr. Triple-Double himself, the Big O, Oscar Robertson.
He was the next guy on my list.
For people who may not know, I feel like the way that I described this dude was Russell Westbrook before Russell Westbrook.
I would argue that Russell Westbrook has hurt Oscar Robertson in the public imagination because a guy averaging a triple-double for a season used to sound like the most absolutely insane thing in the world, and now it just sounds a little bit less insane.
I mean, I feel like it's kind of like one of those things, like when a guy in the MLB wins the Triple Crown, it used to be like automatic, but then like you had the year that Miguel Cabrera won the Triple Crown, and Mike Trout was still clearly probably the best player in the AL.
Yeah, I mean
to be fair, Cabrera still won that MVP, but
yeah, Russell Westbrook also won the MVP after he got the triple-double for a season.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, a guy who, for his career averaged like, over 25 points a game. Came in like on fire to start his career as a rookie, averaged 30 and a half a game in 60-61.
Yeah, that's insane.
Do you know who he played for?
I believe he played for the Royals, who at that time were in Cincinnati. Or were they still in Rochester?
It is the Cincinnati Royals. And as we talk here, 1-1. The U.S. has tied it up from St. Louis's own Brady Tkachuk. So
I know what team he plays for.
The Blues? Oh.
Let's move on. Yeah, Big O, Oscar Robertson.
Yeah, I mean, a guy who in his first, this is kind of a fun stat, I thought. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In his first 8 NBA seasons, never finished lower than 5th in MVP voting.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
And people are like, oh, he averaged the triple-double and all that stuff. His rookie year, he averaged 30.5, 10.1 rebounds, and 9.7 assists. So, he almost did it as a rookie.
I just want to point out that Oscar Robertson has the same career rebounds per game as Dirk Nowitzki, who very realistically could be drafted on this episode and was a big man. That's insane.
Yeah, I guess that you go without saying, guys, he's a point guard who stood 6'5".
Yeah.
I mean, in a day and age where I don't want to say that rebounds don't matter now, but the act of rebounding seems very different now than maybe it did in those days.
It was very much centered around the big men for the most part. We were just talking about John Stockton, who played 2 or 3 decades after Oscar Robertson. He averaged 2.7 rebounds per game, and that was in a much more fluid era than the Oscar Robertson one. In that era, people were thinking about the forwards and the centers play right up by the basket, the guards play back, and that's just kind of how it is. But Oscar Robertson just kind of did everything. And it's probably for the best that he had a run after his Royals time with the Milwaukee Bucks, because I think he'd been in danger of being in the Bob Pettit zone of because his team doesn't exist anymore, because no Sacramento Kings fan is celebrating Oscar Robertson, and understandably, they shouldn't have any special affection for him besides just that he's really good. But I think that helps Oscar Robertson's just overall credibility.
Yeah, I mean, being on that Milwaukee team, obviously that's where he got his championship. I think it was his first year with them in 70-71. So
yeah.
Gee, you got a team with Oscar Robertson and Kareem. That's okay, I guess.
Yeah. It's got to be up there in terms of teams that have had multiple guys drafted so far, aside from the 03-04 Lakers, who have had 3 guys drafted so far and lost to the Detroit Pistons.
Yeah.
Who as of this moment have 1 Hall of Famer, and you could very easily argue that he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. So
Hey, let's not talk about Ben Wallace that way. Uh,
Look, I love Ben Wallace. The guy had no offensive game, though. Absolutely none.
oh, no. Maybe the greatest defensive player and rebounder ever, though. Like,
Of his era, for sure.
yeah. I mean,
basically, you had like, what if you had Bill Russell on defense, and you had like Bill Russell absolutely blitzed on offense?
I mean, he's like one of the few players in NBA history that I'm confident in his prime I can beat him in a free throw contest today.
Yeah, I wouldn't. It's possible. I wouldn't say definitely not. He had some ugly attempts too, but that's neither here nor there. Oscar Robertson had a 84% free throw percentage in his career. That's very good.
Indeed, he had shot 84% from the free throw line, almost 50% from the field. Keep in mind, compared to some of these other guys, the Malone, the Stocktons, in his career only played 1,040 games. How much higher is he? Especially in win shares and stuff like that. If he's, plays a little longer, But yeah, I mean, a guy who I think if you know the sport of basketball, you know him, but not necessarily as known in the pantheon of basketball players as well. But he's one guy where it's just pure stats don't lie, and the guy was just a monster.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so you at number 14 went with a guy that you could argue was somewhat market corrected by Russell Westbrook, even though he's a lot better than Russell Westbrook. All due respect to Russ. I'm going to go with the guy that I think you can make a case was just kind of overshadowed by the fact that not too long after his prime ended, Michael Jordan came to be. And, in just terms of just having a super athletic wing who can just dominate the game. I'm going to go with Julius Erving at number 15. Yeah, I think that if you're going to make the Dr. J case, you have to throw in his ABA career as well. And he was probably the greatest player in ABA history. Just an absolutely dominant force. He was such a great player that the Nets, whenever they joined the NBA and they had to pay this huge fee to the Knicks in order to kind of steal their territory or share their territory, had to sell off Julius Erving. That was the only way they could possibly afford it because they had this insanely good player. And honestly, that team probably could have competed in the NBA right away, but instead he goes to Philadelphia and they build up from there, and he wins some championships there as well, or championships or championship. I have lost track of that.
In the NBA, I think just one title.
Okay, yeah, that's sound, and then a couple in the ABA. That's right. But yeah, between the NBA and the ABA, 16-time All-Star, which is pretty good. You can knock that down a peg or two because of the ABA if you want. I had kind of a weird way of calculating how much to value all NBA versus all ABA, where I basically just took the ABA guys and just knocked them down one team. But even with that, he was still a 5-time All NBA first team, even though he was basically in his prime, arguably even maybe a year past his prime when he got to the NBA.
Yeah.
But was just, an incredible, weapon. And, somebody that I don't think, because you have a guy like Michael Jordan that had a similar style of game, especially 80s Michael Jordan, a similar type of player where it's very vertical. It's kind of a, not a small guy, but a mid-sized NBA player, but he is just holding his own against a very big man-oriented game at that point, just with verticality. And I think Julius Erving gets probably proper respect in terms of how much the older guys, the old timers, look at him. I do kind of wonder if a guy like Erving, who great player but doesn't necessarily have NBA records, it's not like Wilt Chamberlain where his numbers are undeniable, but numbers are still very good. And I think that I almost want to defer to the guys that saw him, because people who saw Julius Erving are this guy was unbelievable. And he is also the only NBA player referenced in my favorite comedy movie of all time, This Is Spinal Tap.
This is true.
He recorded a book on tape The complete works of Washington Irving.
Read by Julius Irving. So
Read by a Dr. J. I'm not sure what that's all about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's he's definitely a guy who you almost wonder, like, like you said, I think I defer to people. Like, I think one way to tell the influence he has is, like, I distinctly remember, like, a ton as a kid, like, seeing Dr. J jerseys after his playing days. Like,
oh yeah,
people wearing them, selling them. Like, I was, as a kid, like, and this is, I don't know if it's sad to say, but, like, to me, it was almost like he was, like, I was like, oh, was he the first black player to play in the NBA? Like, I didn't know as a kid. And I knew of Jackie Robinson and things, and obviously he was not even close to that. But a guy who a lot of people credit for, the changing of the tide, how basketball is played, like you sort of alluded to. Um, the Flash, the Fro. I mean,
oh yeah.
it
Like
was like,
you think of a certain era of the NBA and of professional basketball. You think of a guy like Julius Irving for sure.
yeah, and yeah. I mean, I think that goes a long way. Like, to me, like, I think the stats, like you said, they may not jump off, or you have to take them with a grain of salt if you're looking at them with ABA stats or whatever. But I think in terms of just excuse me, pure importance to the game, I think he's up there. Like, and yeah, I mean, I don't think you can really question it too much. I mean, I've always thought of them, the best comparison I feel like I've ever been able to come to is, like, Ichiro was in baseball, maybe. Like,
That's a good comparison. Where
I came over, what does Ichiro's career look like if he spends his entire playing career here and he's not like 30 when he comes over?
Yeah, and you could also argue that, like, Ichiro's a player that, like, he deserves some style points. Like, it's not that he wasn't a great player, because he was, but, like, the way he played, like, he played with this flair that really energized people, which is why you have people freaking out about him not getting every Hall of Fame vote, which is, I think, kind of weird.
It is silly that he didn't, if you ask me, but it's
silly that he didn't, but I think you could say that about a lot of guys. I don't think he's the only guy who...
I mean, nobody's ever accused MLB Hall of Fame voters of, making sense. So, I think
it is funny that you...
Great pick.
It is funny that you mentioned the thinking Julius Irving was the first black player in the NBA, because I told you the story about when I discovered who the first black player in the NBA was when I was making this list, right?
Did.
So as part of my list making process, I pulled every Hall of Famer onto, like, a spreadsheet, and that includes Charles Chuck Cooper, who is a Hall of Famer who played 409 games, 6.7 points per game, 5.9 rebounds, never made an All-NBA team, never won a title, never got MVP votes, anything like that. And I was like, how on earth is this guy in the Hall of Fame? And then I look up his Wikipedia page. It's like, oh, okay, you can be in the Hall of Fame. Like,
yeah, you're allowed.
like baseball just happened to have the color barrier broken by an actual Hall of Fame level player, but not every sport's going to have that. And
yeah. No,
yeah, our top 15 players are my top 15 players, so I'm pretty excited about.
Hey, look
that.
at us.
Yeah.
So
see if you can pick my number 16 here.
Say, how crazy can I go here at 16? So this could be crazy that I'm going to do this, but I'm going to go with a guy that's still current. My next pick.
Okay.
Trailblazers fans, I think, will forever hate it when I say this guy's name. They chose Greg Oden over him.
Yeah.
Kevin Durant's, like, again, while he may be kind of an oddball, but, like, golly, he's so
great
good.
Poster.
I mean, great movie, Thunderstruck.
Never saw it, but yeah.
I'm kidding. I've never seen it in my life. I did eat at his restaurant in OKC one time, back when they had that.
Nice.
Um, it
That's still
was,
open because we're going to OKC pretty soon. I would
yeah,
be honored eating
no,
Kevin Durant's
it's
restaurant.
been closed. I think after he got traded, I think it closed down.
Oh, he didn't get traded.
Or yeah, or after he left. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Uh, that was just that's the medicine talking. 14-time All Star, 2-time champ. Maybe the best pure scorer I've ever seen in my entire life. Like play the game of basketball.
Yeah. Like he
Uh,
really was like people use the phrase unicorn a lot with like Victor Wembanyama, but like Durant as like a true 7-footer who was like one of the best shooters of all time. Absurd.
yeah, it was funny because we'll always reference the song "Hey, We Want Greg Oden." Uh, Obviously, him and Greg Oden in the same draft, different career paths they've taken. Although I think Greg
Yes,
Oden's playing like
yes.
the basketball league now or whatever, the 3-on-3 league. I think he's playing in. So good,
I mean,
good for
honestly,
him
if you're still
staying
gonna
healthy.
check, yeah.
But he was the guy. It was funny. And I'll always like bang the drum. I was always a Durant guy. You knew me then. I was always pro Durant over Oden.
I actually didn't know you then. I knew you like a couple years after that, but I
I
didn't know
mean,
you in
I feel like I
'07.
always maybe I told you then. I don't know, but like I was always very staunchly in the camp of Kevin Durant. A lot of people, obviously, he was, still is extremely skinny, but like in college was like a rail.
Yeah.
Didn't,
He's bulked. If people think he's skinny now, he has bulked up a lot.
yeah. Well, look up pictures of him in his one year at Texas. Um, and what he could only bench the bar or bench the whatever at the combine like 4 times or something, and people are like, "Oh, he's weak. He's not." Blah, blah, blah." I'm like, "Yeah, but I've watched him play basketball." It's
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, who knows what Greg Oden's career becomes if he doesn't have the injuries. But
Yeah.
I think what made him so great is also what led to his injuries because he's just a massive, massive human being.
Correct.
So,
Like
but I mean, yeah,
sometimes if you're built like Shaq, you can like withstand it, but a lot of the times you basically have like the Bill Walton track, and I mean obviously Bill Walton had a much more productive career than Odin, but like that type of player.
it is kind of crazy to me that Durant only has one MVP. But
Yeah,
I mean, maybe the greatest MVP acceptance speech of all time
it's up there.
when he calls his mom, you're the real MVP. It's like,
Yeah,
it's hard not to get emotional when a guy talks about his mom like that. And in the middle of his career, missed an entire season as well. So,
he had a
and a reason.
couple. He had a couple long stretch. The first year where he was signed with Brooklyn, he missed, and he had like basically almost a full miss season with the Thunder as well,
Yeah,
where
14,
they were
15,
probably where
the
they were
year
like
after he
arguably the
made.
best. They were arguably the best team in the West. It was like them and the Spurs were the top two. He gets hurt
Yeah,
early on, and they missed the playoffs. And they had some other injuries too, but like that's like such an impactful player. But yeah, Kevin Durant rocks. I had him at number 17, but I'm not going to argue with him at 16 either. That's
yeah,
he's
and I think one thing that like elevates me with him versus others too is the all-time like U.S. Olympic basketball scoring leader.
oh yeah.
Rocked. Like this last Olympics was maybe the first one where like he wasn't the go-to guy. I feel like, and he still contributed, but
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, for a while it was just like it seemed like there were a couple of years of like, all right, just like Katie and Carmelo shoot threes, and that's how the U.S. will just get a bunch of points. So
Not the
a guy.
worst strategy in the world.
No, I mean, dude, international ball Carmelo was like, you move that line in just a little bit, and he was an elite shooter all of a sudden.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Yes.
so I mean, it was, but yeah, you look back at some of those like Thunder teams that he was on to, and just like, what could have been.
Yeah. I mean, that was like I think people kind of misremembered a little bit because James Harden was not the fully formed version of James Harden that
Yeah,
he would
he was
become.
he was six man James Harden.
Yeah, and he was a really good sixth man, but
Yeah,
not quite. Yeah, not the MVP level player that he would become, but like
no,
yeah, him and Russ. Like I always had a good time watching Durant. I loved him with the Thunder. Honestly, I never really begrudged him to go into the Warriors thing. It's like I get it.
he
I get
got
why people
rings. I don't think he cared that much.
I get why people think he's corny or whatever, but he is just like aesthetically probably my favorite player to watch of like this era.
Like, I mean,
There's a guy you won a couple rings with that's right up there in terms of just pure aesthetics, and like
yeah,
he's not as good as
he also maybe talked about in this episode. Even I don't
yeah
know, but
yeah
he
he's not Durant's not LeBron, but like he is just like such an enjoyable player to
yeah.
watch, and
Well, whereas like LeBron to me, what is just an absolute force and everything. Like a guy at 7 feet. To the word I always use to describe Kevin Durant is smooth. Like
yeah
you know, like you could just tell. I feel like half the time when he releases a jump shot, you're like, oh, it's not touching anything but twine. Like it's going. And yeah, I mean, just like so fun to like, we had seen a few other big guys who could shoot, like Dirk had been around, but if Dirk tried to handle the ball, he moved about like I move, and I'm an out of
he
shape
was
non
yeah
NBA
he was
player.
not quite Durant in terms of just overall smoothness,
Yeah,
but yeah, I
athleticism,
mean,
even if you want to say it. Like nothing against Dirk, I love Dirk. Um, but yeah, I think Katie at 16 for me is just like, you know what, let's go for it.
yeah, no arguments for me. So for number 17, so my next two players that I have up on my board are both guys that got mentioned while discussing Kevin Durant. I'll just go with the one that I had ranked one spot ahead of Kevin Durant. We literally just talked about him. It's Dirk Nowitzki. I think that Dirk Nowitzki. I mean, honestly, I think Durant's probably going to pass him in my estimation. Like before he's done. Like the fact that Kevin, like because of how old LeBron is, I think people underrate like the fact that Kevin Durant's still this good while he's 36 years old. Like he's older than Jordan was when he left the Bulls. Like
It's like
it's
Durant's averaging
yeah.
like 27 a game this year. Like,
Yeah. But Dirk is just kind of a true franchise icon. There's been a lot of glowing remembrances of Dirk Nowitzki from Dallas Mavericks fans over the last 11 and a half days or so. Trying to do the exact math
oh, the
on
the
that whole
losing.
ugliness, but yeah, Dirk Nowitzki just kind of a guy who really was a do everything type of player. I think early on he had a reputation for not being a very good defensive player, but I think that that was honestly more of like a reflection of the team as a whole. And I think that he was a guy who honestly his reputation early on was kind of similar to what Durant's reputation would become. I think that he's just kind of more of a like classic big man, whereas
Yeah,
Durant is a true like Durant for much of his career has been like a true three. Like he's truly been a small forward, whereas Dirk's more of a power forward center type guy who also has great finesse. Like he was one of the first big men that was able to shoot threes. He had a career 3-point percentage of 38% of threes for his career. That's like it was unheard of at that point.
yeah.
Four-time All NBA first team, but 5-time second team, 3-time third team. Just a guy who like was uniformly considered a great player for so long. I think that I talked a lot about Bob Pettit's title when discussing him. I think Dirk Nowitzki's title is like up there in terms of like great, like most impactful, one title wonders in NBA history because of just how acclaimed that Miami Heat team was, and
Yeah.
how much people were talking about their big three as this unbelievable force, and Nowitzki, who at that point was like he wasn't old, but he was like 33 or so. Like he was like a little past his prime, but he was the guy for that team. There was no dispute who Finals MVP was going to be. ones that came around, like, Jason Terry and Jason Kidd played well or whatever, but that was Dirk's team. It was always Dirk's team, and also just a super likable guy that seems to be pretty beloved. I believe the first player that's been drafted who was an international player for a country other than the United States. Because like we had Hakeem and we had Tim Duncan, but they played for the U.S. and
and then
Dirk Nowitzki.
Obviously, even like Kobe, born outside the U.S.
Was he?
He was born in Italy.
Oh, I thought he was born in Phil. Okay, I can't say I've looked it up, but not recently at least. But yeah, Dirk Nowitzki, has the one MVP. Arguably a little overshadowed by the fact that his team proceeded to lose as the 1 seed immediately after he won MVP. Like dragged him back out to receive MVP during the playoffs after his team had gotten eliminated, which is just rude. But a guy who played in Dallas forever. He played 1,522 career games, which I believe is it's definitely not the most ever, but it's way up there.
Yeah.
Gotta find where I have Robert Parrish on this list and see where he is, because I know he's the all-time leader. But yeah, that's shout out to Dirk. He's cool and good, and that is why I'm happy to select him at number 17. And we are once again at a point where our top 17 is my top 17.
Your top 17. So I mean, yeah, Dirk's a guy who, I talked about, I think earlier, how the Shaq and Kobe Lakers kind of got me watching the NBA. For whatever reason, then I gravitated to becoming whenever I would like play an NBA video game, I would be the Mavericks.
Oh yeah, they were such a fun team to play. Because honestly, video game players adopted the 3-point revolution before NBA teams did. And you had him and Steve Nash on the same court, and Michael Finley wasn't exactly a slouch at that either.
Which Michael Finley, from the game, at least one of the ones I remember playing, I don't know, it was one of the NBA lives I was playing, I think. Michael Finley could dunk from like almost inside the 3-point line, it seemed like, because he had the little like power like shoe symbol.
Oh yeah.
And I remember I shot like 97% in a season with Michael Finley. And that included one time accidentally heaving a half-court shot that he swished while winning a game.
Doing the Baron Davis? This guy inexplicably pops it up from distance and goes right in.
I mean, But, yeah, I mean, I think it was, like, Dirk was... It was hard not to love Dirk. Like, big German guy. Not the first big German guy that was in the NBA, but shout out to Detlef Schrempf. But I believe that Dirk is the all-time European scoring leader in NBA history.
Yeah, I would think so. I didn't really think of who. I mean, like Pau Gasol or Tony Parker or somebody, but Dirk.
Giannis is probably up there at this point.
Yeah, Dirk was more of a volume shooter than.
Yeah,
maybe not Giannis, but then the other guys I mentioned.
I mean, and a guy who, admittedly, especially his last few seasons, his offensive production was, next to nothing, probably. I mean, or not next to, but compared to what he was.
Yeah, his points per game average it's 20.7, which just seems like a typo, but like, during his peak years was much more of an offensive force.
Yeah, I mean, if you start from like 0405, 26-6, 24-6, 23-6, 25-9, but remember on, the earlier teams, like he had the other guys that we're talking about too. And then later on when you play with Jason Terry, he's going to shoot 29 times a game.
Shoot more than Jason Terry.
Antoine Walker.
No one shoots more than Antoine Walker. They're off the team if they shoot more than Antoine Walker.
A player that John and I just love to reminisce about is Antoine Walker, but
yeah. The term heat check is thrown around a lot these days, but nobody did the heat check more than Antoine Walker. The answer was always no, but boy did he try it.
You remember the rule we said that if it was implemented, that Antoine Walker would be the perfect person for
The 4-pointer from half court.
or pointer from half court, which is literally like a thing in Harlem Globetrotters games now. They have these big circles on the floor that are for four. But
If you give a 4-point line to Antoine Walker, the scoring rate of the entire NBA would go down just because of him attempting them.
you know who would make those 4-pointers more than him? Dirk Nowitzki.
Is this? I thought maybe you were
But also for
transitioning.
that segue, if you want to go to the next one, yeah, I'm taking Steph
Yes.
next. So
Yeah, he was my next up too. That's why I thought it was going to happen.
I feel like it's. I mean, if you want to talk about guys that are fun as heck to watch play basketball.
Yeah, like I said, it's him and Durant for me for this era.
Yeah, it's there's been great shooters, and then there's Steph.
Yeah, like he kind of like everything that we thought that like Reggie Miller or Ray Allen was, like Steph became. Like he was that guy of just like guy can just kind of put it up from anywhere. Like there's a reason that like when Caitlin Clark started going nuts at Iowa, like the only comp was Steph because like people just don't play that way except for video games, but Steph does it. And he's insanely good.
You're seeing it. Like Steph, I think that's who the kids, look up to in terms of like their game. Like I think we're gonna look back even more and be like, well, Steph has changed the game. Like, I mean, there's other guys that I think can shoot from anywhere, maybe not, or not maybe, but not the same as him. But like, I think Damian Lillard's pretty much.
Yeah, he would be in the conversation.
Like, he, would be maybe the next comparable, but like Steph's way to like how he shoots, like can a lot of these guys like catch and shoot but like the way he can just dribble behind the back. I mean, and he still has it. Like look at the Olympics this year. The nail in the coffin three he hit against France. I mean, has two guys on him, goes behind the back, fading back over two guys, and just drills it. And it's like, oh. Like,
yeah,
he had teams to go and like, what do we do? Like, because he's not, silly about shooting the three either. If the shot's not there, he'll also just take you off the dribble and like is perfectly apt at getting to the hoop. And if you foul him when he drives to the hoop, he's going to shoot 90% from the line. Like, I'm honestly surprised it's that low, 91% for his career.
Yeah, I mentioned this with Durant, but like Steph really is like he really is just he does like it. I'm losing my words on it just thinking about Steph Curry, but just like I remember like watching that gold medal game this summer and just being like he is unreal and he's doing this not a young man. Like
no.
He is again, 35. He's 36, I think. He's older than I am. He is and he's just unbelievable and he's still unbelievable and this is a guy who I think part of the reason he appeals so much to like younger generations is the fact that he's like 6'3" and doesn't look exceptionally athletic. Like LeBron looks like a superhero. Kevin Durant is like skinnier, but he's still like unattainably tall. Like if you saw Steph Curry walking down the street, I'd be like, oh, that guy's like kind of tall, but like he doesn't look like he should be like one of the great superheroes in the history of the sport, and yet he absolutely is.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about. Like Steph Curry did not win Rookie of the Year. And
Tyreek Evans.
Yeah, that was the Tyreek year.
So nuts. Because that was not a thin draft. That was Steph. It was James Harden. Blake Griffin was hurt that year, but like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, so there were 6 guys who received votes that year. You had Tyreek, Stephen Curry, Brandon Jennings finished 3rd.
Nice.
Darren Collison out of UCLA. Somebody gave him a first place vote. Like, let's not think that's not weird.
I mean, I respect Darren Collison. That seems a little bit extreme.
Yeah. And then Johnny Flynn and Taj Gibson each received 2 whole points that year.
Love Taj Gibson or Johnny Flynn.
Good old Johnny Flynn. That's Syracuse boy, right?
Yeah, a guy that was drafted ahead of Steph.
Yeah. Yeah, how many teams like it, that's a draft, all right. But Steph Curry, like my son is 4. My son knows exactly one NBA player. That NBA player is Steph Curry. And
Yeah,
why
it's
was it? It's because when I was watching the gold medal game this year, he fell in love with his night celebration. Thought it was hilarious. Then I explained it, and he's like, "Oh, he's really good at basketball." So like, whenever my son plays on our little like indoor hoops, he's like, he always says that he's Steph Curry. So it's like, I had to hold off to not be biased.
I'd say the one difference. The one difference I think would be that I think your son can probably dunk on the indoor hoop.
No, this one hangs on a door, so unless he's like standing in a chair or something, he can't.
Yeah, I was thinking like a Fisher Price kind of hoop. Okay.
No. I did send you a video of my 15-month-old daughter dunking on one of those. So next, Caitlin Clark. I think she's honestly going to be more athletic than my son is, which is
Caitlin Clark can't dunk.
Exactly.
Next, Lisa Leslie.
I like how all like people who dunk, you go to Lisa Leslie and not like.
Okay, here's the first one.
Can A'ja Wilson dunk?
Yeah.
I mean, Brittney.
I think Griner's probably the most prolific dunker, but I decided to just go with the original.
Yeah, I mean, trust me, I remember how big of a deal it was when Lisa Leslie dunked in a WNBA game. It was like, oh my. And then Candace Parker's like out competing in high school dunk contests like shortly thereafter.
Yeah, it's almost like athletes get better over time.
You know, they just
all right. Shall I move on to number 19? Do we want to keep it off at top 20? I don't know how you're feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I think 20 would be good. The episode, because we'll probably hit probably around 90-ish minutes or something. So,
not even that long. We're only at an hour 7 so far. So, see how much trimming I do. Not much usually.
Nah, trim out a few of my coughs.
Right. So, for number 19, since we've taken my top 18 players already, we'll go with my number 19 player. I'm going to go with a player who I think is pretty underrated in the modern sense, just because honestly is probably like almost seems like more of a trivia answer at this point. I am drafting my second player who played in St. Louis, and I am drafting my second Malone of the day. I am drafting Moses Malone.
When you said the trivia thing, that's immediately who I thought you were going with, because obviously I'm assuming you're referring to the first player drafted directly out of high school.
Yes. And the guy who, did play in the ABA, but most of his career was spent in the NBA. 4-time first team, won 3 MVPs. I think those were all NBA ones, unless I threw an ABA one in there, but just a really dominant force, alongside Julius Erving, who I referenced before, also played with Hakeem. And, one of the kind of singular, kind of offensive, like dominant big men of that era. A guy who averaged 12.3 rebounds per game and, 20.3 points. That includes like some seasons near the end where he was just like coming off the bench. He had a really long career. And, even though towards the end he was pretty cooked, he was just kind of, hanging around. 11 times he received MVP votes. He got 6 rebounding titles. That's, I would dare say, pretty impressive.
Pretty good.
Won a Finals MVP in there. Might be the single NBA player that's done the least justice by his basketball reference picture, because that man looks incredibly out of shape in his basketball reference photo. Like, it looks like it had to have been from like one of the last couple seasons where he was packing them on. But when he was a young man, he
looks like he's struggling.
Yeah, he looks like he just ran down the court a couple times and is just like
It
looks like
looks
he
like
maybe smoked a
maybe
couple packs of cigarettes.
six,
Yeah,
7 minutes into a game of pickup. Like,
it's rough, but he is a great player and uh, a 9.6% career 3-point shooter, which is what happens when you look at a big man from like the very beginning of the 3-point era. But he wasn't out there for that. He was actually had a 76% free throw percentage, which is for a big man of that era especially,
yeah, it's pretty
pretty
good.
solid. But yeah, I think one of those guys that people don't necessarily think of as being like an outstanding, like dominant player in the same way that, even a guy like, Hakeem Olajuwon is viewed as, but somebody that, in his time was a genuinely great player and, go Spirits, of course.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you don't, at the end of it, like, yeah, you don't win 3 MVPs without being really, really good. You know, I think when you hit that cutoff, and
Yeah, and it like at that point, I feel like Julius Irving is the more famous player, certainly. And obviously, I drafted Julius Irving before I drafted Moses Malone, so I think he's like incrementally better. But like during the Sixers, like window of being the best team in the NBA, which they were in the early '80s, like Moses Malone was the best player on that team, and they had obviously Dr. J, they had Bobby Jones, Maurice Cheeks, they had other good players, but he was the sort of singular player who, when he's going against the Lakers in the finals, you need a guy who can balance out Kareem, and he was doing that.
no, yeah, it's Moses is a guy who it's hard. These guys that I necessarily didn't see play as much, or if I have any recollection of seeing them, it's at the very end. Um, but when you look at it, obviously to be drafted out of high school obviously is a big deal. I think that was always the interesting thing to look at growing up. So yeah, I think that's a good pick. I'm sorry I don't really have more to say on it, but I like the
No,
pick.
I mean, I get it, but like, it's crazy to think because he was drafted in 1974 in the ABA, and he played until 1995. Like, I just barely missed seeing him play, and he seems like he's from a completely different era.
Yeah, he's definitely a guy that I always just like I think of more and like for whatever reason he's in the 70s like almost exclusively in my head and not the case. So
Yeah, and like he kind of bounced around a little bit. Like, I keep talking about his Sixers era. It actually only lasted 4 seasons, which seems incorrect. But he had a run with the Rockets. A few years with the Hawks. Played with the Bucks for a while. Just kind of ended his career with the Spurs, which wouldn't surprise me if that's where his picture came from. He's backing up peak David Robinson. Probably didn't have to be in absolute tip top shape, but
I mean, yeah, but if David Robinson's yelling at me to get in shape just based on the shape he was in at his peak, that man was woof. But
all right,
all
you're up
right,
at number 20.
all right, I'm up at 20.
If you pick my number 20, I'm just gonna celebrate. You make
Yeah,
it
it's a
so easy to
favorite.
remember where to hide Rose.
It I think where I'm gonna go, and I may be reaching on this guy a little bit, but this guy does not have an MVP,
Okay.
who I'm gonna go with. And he may be most famous, not even for his playing career, but every time you look at anything to do with the NBA, you see his silhouette.
Legally speaking, the NBA doesn't claim that, but yes,
Yes, but I
we
will go with
know.
the logo, Jerry West at 20.
Yeah, I had him a little bit lower, and it was one of those things where it's like I don't know if that's actually correct, but
Yeah,
yeah, that's a fair choice. I'm not going to argue against it.
you know, like I said, doesn't have an MVP, but has a title and does have a Finals MVP. in a year in which they did not win. He won Finals
Wild.
MVP.
Absolutely wild.
14-time All-Star, 12-time All-NBA, scoring champ, 5-time All-Defensive. Just like, let's be honest too. Like, how much better are Jerry West numbers if he has a 3-point line too? Like,
Probably quite a bit better. I believe he's the first player. I believe he's the first player that's been drafted that doesn't have an MVP. If I'm not
might be,
mistaken.
could be, and it's he did finish second in voting 4 times.
He got MVP votes 10 times. He was in the conversation.
So his losses when he finished second, he lost to Wilt, Willis Reed.
Okay.
Kareem.
Okay. Pretty good. The problem is that there's no
Kareem again. Like,
the problem is that there's no NBA MVPs like up until like Derrick Rose, who just seem like kind of ridiculous in hindsight. Like, it's not like with like baseball where like I always think of Zoilo I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it, but Zoilo Versalles, the shortstop for the Twins who won MVP in the '60s. Where it's like, how did this guy? But yeah, you won an MVP in the NBA. You're either in the Hall of Fame, you're going to be in the Hall of Fame, or you're Derrick Rose, basically.
I mean, and it's Jerry West, and like I said, he is a 12-time All NBA. All but 2 of those were first team All NBAs. So he's a 10-time first. Like, that's pretty crazy.
And was a truly excellent guard in an era that didn't necessarily have excellent guards, which on one hand you could say inflated his All-NBA totals, but you could also say like maybe he was just boxing out the competition. Like that would be a reasonable thing to make the case of.
He was a guy who could score at will. Also, I mean, averaged like one of those like different guards who like towards the end of his career is when he really became a passer even more. In his third to last season, actually almost averaged 10 assists a game, 9.7 a game, 6.7 a game for his career. So I mean, just a guy who could do everything. But then, I joke about him, unofficially at least being the logo, but then like has a coaching career, is it front office as well, I think, right?
Like awesome. And like arguably a Hall of Fame executive, like the guy that made the Kobe Bryant trade on draft day, the guy that kind of built the 80s Lakers, the guy that arguably had the most ungrateful job in the history of the NBA draft lottery, which was being at the lottery and having to watch to see whether he was going to lose his first round pick or get the pick to draft LeBron James. One of the truly just like, and like not only does he have to go through that, but he was right after Stan Kroenke was there for the Carmelo Anthony pick to be revealed.
Oh yeah,
God, unfair. But yeah, Jerry West is certainly a great player, and yeah, like I said, I have him a little bit lower, but I don't know that that's rational. Like, I think there's other guys you could argue ahead of him, but like certainly can't argue against that choice. And like, it's kind of funny to look at his kind of career parallel with Elgin Baylor, a guy that he was teammates with. Jerry West averaged 27 points a game. Elgin Baylor averaged 27.4 points per game. These guys are on the same team for most of their careers. It's like, what was everybody else even doing? They just like applauding, just like, good job, guys.
I mean, to be fair, you pass all those guys. Oh, we're getting 54 a night from them.
Yeah, it's like one Wilt Chamberlain.
Yeah, but just that's why Wilt was drafted much earlier.
Fair.
But yeah, I mean, it's a and a guy who, and I've legitimately like a bunch of the stories I hear, it's nothing but, I feel like one of those guys where nothing but good things kind of said about him too, just like in terms of his helpfulness, even up until because I believe he passed away last year.
Yeah, it was recently.
Like, also a West Virginia boy. Have to shout out there as my mother's from West Virginia, so there ain't too many famous ones, so I can claim him.
Yeah, I know at least in the Winning Time HBO series, Jerry West kind of comes across as like a little bit of a jerk, but like it kind of seemed like more of like a hothead rather than like actually a bad guy. Just like a guy who's like extremely competitive and just wants to like go out of just like do whatever he can to win. And
Yeah, well, and
you know,
Winning
one
Time
of
is a dramatization as well, so it's like,
you don't say.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, I don't know. It, I've always likened it to in the American Underdog movie, like the depiction of Mike Martz in that movie is just over the top ridiculous to me at times.
Winning Time was produced by Adam McKay, and you can tell. Put it that
Um,
way.
yeah, it's
For better or worse, which is the defining thing to say about everything Adam McKay's ever done, which is for better or worse.
there is you're gonna get Adam McKay. There's yeah,
Yeah.
no doubts there.
He,
But
he does some things very well, he does some things very exhaustingly. And sometimes it's the same thing at the
looking
same
at you,
time.
don't look up.
It's got some really good moments, but boy is it not subtle.
Yeah, it's like you want subtlety in the message. Nope, here's a 2x4 that's just gonna whack you in the
Yeah.
face for 2 hours.
Maybe the
And
least
then,
subtle asteroid movie ever, and I've seen Armageddon.
I mean, that's true. And but at the same time, the man's first movie was also Anchorman, which is crazy. So
Also an insane movie, but for different reasons.
yes,
All right, you want me to recap the picks 11 through 20?
yeah, let's give the people
Hey,
what they want, which is a recap.
I think what people want is for the episode to end, but that'll happen soon enough. Number 11 is Bob Pettit. Number 12, Hakeem Olajuwon. Number 13, Carl Malone. Number 14, Oscar Robertson. Number 15, Julius Irving. Number 16, Kevin Durant. Number 17, Dirk Nowitzki. Number 18, Stephen Curry. Number 19, Moses Malone. And number 20, Jerry West. I have to do
These
this
are
again
good
sometime.
teams.
There's still some really awesome players on the board, so
That's what I think is going to make this fun. It's like there's going to be a long time before this like starts to get weird. I feel like.
I'm looking at my list and I'm looking at the guy who's number 47, and he kind of stands out as like, I don't really have anything to say about this guy. But everyone before that, I feel like I can at least put up some kind of facade towards, so we'll at least get to there.
But
But
yeah,
yeah, that sounds like an episode. Oh, I'm hiccuping now. Really time to cut this off.
yeah.
And then catch the rest of this hockey game.
Say it's still 1-1.
All right, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Draft Day Dad Shop. Not much is said on there, but they can find me there. Yeah. What about you, John? Where can the people find you? What are you up to these days?
You can find me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at JohnJF125. Um, don't know what's going on with the Cardinals. I'll eventually have some things to say about. I guess they're keeping Nolan Arenado. I don't know. It's so weird. I'm eventually gonna write what's gonna like come across more as a manifesto, but something will be written at some point. But I got STLbullpen.com for that. In the meantime, we're talking basketball because that's a sport where things are actually going on, even though the things we're discussing aren't really related to those things.
But they are playing basketball. So
Yeah, we got All-Star Weekend coming up.
got All-Star Weekend coming up. I'm admittedly more into college basketball this year than I have been in a long time, I feel like.
Yeah,
Maybe
Mizzou's good now.
Missouri is good. Um, But also fun to look at things like Cooper Flag. Turns out probably not overrated. So
Yeah. Saturday is going to be a shockingly good sports day given the time of year it is. You have a decent Mizzou game. You have Alabama Auburn, who I believe are 1-2, or certainly are way up there. Dunk contest, USA Canada in the Four Nations tournament. It's going to be fun.
And I'm gonna be like doing a day trip with my entire family that day, and won't get to watch any of it except on my phone if I choose to ignore my family. Toss
I mean,
up a whole
I will be ignoring your family. I can't speak for you. You have to make that decision on your own.
That's with the Valentine's tomorrow as
That's
we're
tomorrow. That's
recording.
not Saturday.
Yes, but then I'm taking off tomorrow, and then I actually have the President's Day off, so I have a 4-day weekend this weekend.
Oh,
So
nice.
we're thinking about taking our children to a nearby locale that is very touristy, because in the off season they have deals for locals, so it's like
Nice.
half price or less to go to some of these places that in the summer cost a lot of money. So
I don't like missing out on sports, but I do like a deal, so I will give you credit
I
there.
mean, it's what I try to do, and yeah, um, but enjoy your Valentine's Day, your President's Day, your sports weekend, wherever you are. And
Daytona 500s on Sunday.
oh man, my in-laws will be stoked because my
We can do a
father-in-law just
NASCAR draft.
retired, so he's got tons of time.
We could do a NASCAR draft. We could bring Tyler follows NASCAR. He would show up for a NASCAR draft.
I mean, I certainly am passable enough in NASCAR to
Oh
potentially
yeah, I
throw.
can. I would certainly have more to say about the NASCAR draft than the wrestling draft. In case people thought that my lack of knowledge of wrestling meant that I wasn't white trash. No, I am, but just in different ways.
Yeah, wrestling, boy, the more time goes on, the more I can do more of those because my son has gotten really into wrestling. So it's been every Monday and Friday. He's like, Dad, do we get to watch wrestling tonight? So
Nice. Maybe I'll crash. Looks like Here's a Guy's recording right now. I'll just crash it until Jack Down to show up and do a wrestling podcast. I'm sure their
yeah,
episode would really appreciate it.
tell him to learn my name before he comes on next time, though.
I will do no such thing.
That was more in there
Okay.
to see if he listens to this episode or not.
I guess we'll find out.
Yeah. At me, Jack John. Come at me, bro.
Had a distinct lack of Pacers, though. I think he's a Spurs fan, so he's gotten some of those. All right, bye everybody.